Hello interwebs and welcome, because it is time for me to do a review of Infinity Train Season 2. Yes, for those of you who don't know, I've already done a review of Infinity Train Season 1, which Infinity Train being this wonderfully weird and imaginative, like, little personal growth show that's told over 10 episode seasons, which are only 10 minutes long, so each season is really only like a movie-length thing, and each season is its sort of own little anthology, all set on the Infinity Train, this sort of car where each train of the car is sort of its own universe, its own world. It can be its own sort of themed thing, and people who are put onto this train are sort of, spoilers for the first season, there to sort of like work through some sort of personal growth. I loved season 1 of this show. What I loved that season 1 of the show was sort of built on the mystery of this car and sort of what the Infinity Train was and sort of what was going on, and sort of all sort of packaging it in Tulip, the main character's journey for that season. And so going into season 2 of this show and how much I loved season 1, I was kind of nervous because I feel like a lot of the mystery, sort of what the entire first season was really built upon, sort of what propelled the story forward, was lost in this season. So I really wondered what season 2 was going to be about. And with that said, season 2 blew my expectations out of the water, but cemented this show in such a brief time that it's had as one of my true favorites and standouts of animation. And I'll just be open and honest, I actually watched season 3 already as well, but I'll only be focusing on season 2 here, but I'll be doing a separate video for season 3. But between the two of them and season 1, this show has just become a skyrocket favorite of mine. And while I'm also going to be doing reviews of it, I'm almost certainly going to be doing a full essay on this show, because this show just wonderfully understands how empathy works and how we build empathy for others, and sort of the ways humans try to stop people understanding empathy. And I think the thematics of that are just so wonderfully told through really personalized stories. And I've been speaking in broad stuff, so let's get into the specifics of this, because this season follows, I'm going to call her Lake, even though the show up until the very last episode calls her Mirror Tulip, but she assigns her name Lake at the end of the season, so I'm going to sort of use that to describe her throughout the entire season. But she was the character that we actually met in season 1 of the show, who was the sort of reflection of Tulip, who sort of wanted to say, hey, I don't wish to be a reflection at all. I'm my own person. I want to go off on my own life and be seen as a full person separate from you, as not just someone who's attached to you. And that was such a great storyline, and it was great for Tulip, the main character of the first season, to sort of understand that other people are people too, and not just there to like bounce your own ideas off of each other, sort of mirroring her need to like understand that about her parents. But here in season 2, they subvert that in such an excellent way, because Mirror Tulip, Lake, she feels that she is just there to be used by other people, to be there to help other people's growth. And you can see the whole arc of this season is really just about her journey to stop being sort of like, to stand up for herself and wish to be seen as her own complete person. That regardless of whether she's not a human, whether she doesn't have that number on her hand, how she's depersoned by the train and people around her and the police that are literally chasing her, that's a really subversive element. We'll get there in a minute. How she just really fights to be seen as a full person, and how much she resents the fact that she's being seen as just a reflection of other people, there to help the journeys of other people instead of getting to exist for herself on her own terms, and how people constantly try to deperson her for that. It's really great, and her character is just so wonderful. Just see the subtle touches they do to like see her like shaving her head, try to distance herself from looking like Tulip. It honestly feels very there's very much like queer vibes, and I don't mean that in terms of like Lake is actually LGBTQ, but like the sort of like trying to push back against society and what society wants you to be, as well as like the sort of name taking that Lake takes at the end also kind of has like a trans sort of feel to it as well. So there's a lot of like queer themes within this, even though the character is not expressly queer, and I really loved that element of it. I also loved Jessie, who we meet in this season, who is like the boy who is there, sort of like the human that we're following. And I like that, again, he sort of gets to be the side character, even though he's sort of the one that has the most overt storytelling journey, the most overt, like, hey, I'm here to have my growth, I have a number on my hand, again, sort of breaking the mold of that first season that I really loved. And he was also just really wonderful as well, as someone who's just like trying to learn to not appease others and not always like be kind, because not always trying to just acquiesce to others' feelings and abilities, which honestly kind of mirrors Lake, because Lake Lake kind of does the same thing. She acquiesces to other people sometimes because she's seen as a reflection of them. And, Jesse does much the same in his own way. And so I like that they are sort of there mirroring each other, but they also need to learn to be seen as separate from each other. And you can see that sort of like codependency that they build, but also how much that codependency is needed and warm and wonderful, but also needs to be set boundaries on it. And it's such a great job. Also, the character of Alan Dracula, the mysterious deer, is so wonderful and did such a great job from being his own unique thing. The very fact that Alan Dracula never really speaks throughout this entire season, but still has a very exacting personality and like a very clear personality and just weird and wackiness. I like the sort of like animal sidekick character. It really came into his own and was very different from the sort of corgi king that we got in season 1. So great differentiation there. Again, there's also some really, like I sort of alluded to, there's some really subversive elements in this story too, with like the police, how the police try to trick Jessie into depersoning Lake and not seeing Lake as their own for person and vilifying her, even though that they're just there to, like, she hasn't really done anything wrong, but her like wanting to be her own person, to be seen as her own person, to stand up for her own rights, is seen as subversive by them and going against what society, her mirror society wants. Again, and using cops for that as a metaphor, again, very subtly political for a kids show that I deeply enjoyed. Just heavily. The other thing with this season as well is I loved the layering of other elements of the last season into this season. Like, we do see characters like Cat show up, 1-1 show up. Kate Mulgrew playing the cat, by the way, wonderfully to perfection. Anytime Kate Mulgrew's in anything, I think she's so great, and I actually really love the cat. So I like, and we also see little characters in the background of scenes from the previous season, so it builds out the world, and yet they're never highlighted or focused on too much. Sometimes like Cat and 1-1 do get like center stage, but they're never like overly present unless where it feels natural. And so I like that really makes this show feel, despite how little time it has, feel expansive. Like the Infinity Train really is expansive and yet a consistent place at the same time that does have overlapping layers of it. We also meet at one point in one episode the Apex, which are a group of people that have depersoned the train participants, and I immediately clocked, and I like I said, I've already seen season 3, but even while watching this, I immediately clocked like, oh, they're going to be the main characters of season 3, and I like that sort of like that overlapping of the different narratives and stories throughout this, that like season 1 overlaps with season 2, overlaps with season 3, but yet they're not entirely like on top of each other. We just sort of like get glimpses into them, but they're not sort of over top of each other necessarily. Again, building out that anthology, building out the sense that this train is its own place, a consistent place, and yet beyond what we just see here. And I deeply enjoyed that whole thing. At the end, though, I thought the end bit of this where Lake really fights for her own humanity or her own sense of personhood and gets to escape to the real world was just such a great metaphor, and doing it with on her own terms instead of being codependent on anyone else was absolutely wonderful. The only weird thing I have to say about it is that when Lake goes to the real world, she's still Chrome. And I have questions about that. Like, I'm sure she's going to face much the same problems. Like, she's going to be depersoned and devalued and seen as a test subject in the real world. So I worry about that a little bit, because if you think about the implications about her being a Chrome person in the real world, it kind of subverts the message a little bit. But I know as the show doesn't really want us to think all that much about the real world. I mean, hell, we saw at the end of season 1 that Tulip no longer has a reflection, so people are going to be thinking she's a vampire all over the place. So the show doesn't want to think us to think too hard about the real world implications of what's going on here. But it was just a thing. I'm like, oh, if you think a little bit, it will kind of ruin the message of the show. But overall, this season was phenomenal and managed to build something new on top of season 1, and sort of, now that the sort of mystery of the show was gone, was able to still say something salient and distinct, yet still staying within the thematics of empathy and growth and learning to think about others, and think about others as full people. And this show, as someone who fights hard with trying to be empathetic in my work, to try to be empathetic towards others, to try to if I may be so presumptuous to say, try to impart and teach empathy to others. This show, I think, really just understands the nuances and complexity of empathy and the hardships of empathy too, in a way that I just deeply resonate with. This show is wonderful. And like I said, I want to be doing a separate season 3 review, but if you haven't seen any of this show, just go watch it. It is a delight, and it doesn't demand a lot of your time. And I think it's important too. Like, this is a show that I would show to my kids to teach them the importance of things like empathy and caring about others. And I think it does it wonderfully. So that's my thoughts on Infinity Train Season 2. What did you think about it? I'd love to hear all your thoughts down in the comments below. But beyond, don't forget to subscribe to this channel as well. But beyond all of that, I just thank you for being here. I hope that you, as always, live long and stay sexy.